Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure, and thanks, Lars, for the invitation to be able to moderate this panel about this very interesting topic. Maybe I would like to just share very quickly my screen before I announce the other panelists to talk a little bit about who Cales is. Many of you, of course, know Cales, but we are a GSA being represented. We represent all over the world. We have 35 offices in 25 countries, representing more than 70 airlines. With 175 people, we moved around 200,000 tons last year, rapidly expanding, investing a lot in technology, state-of-the-art reservation systems, and also in very interesting Power BI tools for our customers. So the three subjects I would like to discuss is, and the questions that I would like to ask is, what will be the outlook for the cargo capacity in this year and the years after? So what will be the developments? Will there be a capacity shortage? What will be the new entrants operating freighters? And we have all seen, of course, that some passenger airlines are starting to get into freighters, but also the e-commerce parties like Amazon, Alibaba, and Mercado Libre in Latin America, they're also looking at freighters. So who will be the new entrants, and who will be the winners, and who will be the losers in the next 5 years in this equation? And finally, what would be your wish list? I mean, we know that the 747-8 will in a couple of years will no longer be produced. So what will happen in the next 10 to 20 years, when they're going to be phased out? What would be your wish list if you would talk to Airbus and Boeing? What would be the ideal freighter look like? So without that, let me see how I can just stop sharing my screen here. Bear with me, sorry. No, this is not working. Sorry. Can somebody help maybe from Lars? Can you help? Because I cannot. Here, I got it. Yeah, thanks. So, we have three very distinguished speakers in our panel today. Michael Steen, the Chief Commercial Officer of Atlas Air and the President and CEO of Titan Aviation Leasing. We have Mike Duggan, who is the Director of International Business Development and Eastern Airlines, LCC. And we have Fitson Abedi, who is the Managing Director of Ethiopian Airlines for the Cargo Division and Logistics Services. So I would like to give the floor first to Michael Steen. So Michael, warm virtual applause to you, and looking forward to your presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I assume that you can hear me all right as well.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. And you can see my screen as well, I suppose? Just to double check.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so thank you for having me, and thank you, Lars, for inviting me to the summit here as well. And it's going to be great to spend the coming hour with my fellow panelists, and of course all of you listening in as well. And we obviously have very turbulent times behind us, and we're in turbulent times. So what I'm going to share with you here first in the next 10 minutes is just a very brief update on the Atlas Air Group, who we are and what we're doing, but many of you know that. But spend most of the time talking about the very important questions that Sebastian just addressed. And that is looking at the market in itself, both capacity and demand, and obviously what can impact that going forward as we tackle a pandemic. So without further ado, let me go through the presentation here. So first of all, quickly regarding the Atlas Air Group. The Atlas Air Group consists of three airlines, operating airlines, Atlas, Southern, and Polar. And combined, it's the second largest freighter operator in the world, measured by FTKs just shortly after FedEx. And we have a market-leading leasing company as well in Titan Aviation Leasing, which is about slightly north of $1 billion portfolio with about 30 aircraft. If you look at our fleet, it's a large fleet, and we have about 50 747 freighters consisting of 400s production freighters, a few converted freighters, and 747-8s. And many of you may have seen here in recent weeks that we placed an order for 4 747-8s which will be the last ones coming up the line here in 2022. And we'll talk more about the outlook, of course, for freighter capacity going forward. In addition to that, a growing 777 fleet with 14 777 freighters. We have 35 767s predominantly operating in express and e-commerce networks, and then a growing fleet of 737-800 freighters as well. If you look at our positioning across the supply chain, we really serve the entire industry with the market-leading outsourcing solution that we have. And the companies that you see listed here, they all have dedicated aircraft operating for them in their respective supply chains. And there are some new entrants here as well, as Sebastian was referring to, and we'll talk more about that during the panel discussion a bit later. If you look at our global footprint, we were in more than about 190 to 100 countries and 400 destinations, and that is also something that's growing now in view of the pandemic and the reduced capacity on the passenger side. But the key thing that we are here to talk about is obviously the market update. And I would like to put in a disclaimer here as well that I'm not going to give a forecast. I'm going to make some statements around what could happen, which is going to be impacted, of course, of different drivers, different risks, etc. And we'll talk more about that as we go through here. But starting with the fact, of course, as we all know, that in normal times, about 50% of global air freight is shipped in freighters and 50% is shipped in passenger bellies, right? And with the hit of the pandemic, that has, of course, been completely changed and distorted. And we'll dig into that in a bit more detail and also talk about what potentially could happen here as we move forward. Looking at the global freighter fleet, I have, by the way, been given the permission by Seabury and Accenture to share some joint material that we have developed here in 2020. We spent a significant amount of time together in order to analyze all the key drivers in the marketplace that impacts supply and demand from an air cargo perspective. And looking at where we ended up in 2020, we saw, of course, the first quarter starting up as a normal year. And we came out of the 2019 that was plagued by trade wars and downturn in trend in economy and slightly lower air freight demand. And then the pandemic hit, of course, in March, and global networks were shut down, passenger airlines grounded capacity. And you can see the immense impact here on available capacity. So about 55% total drop in capacity. And you had, at the peak, more than 15,000 aircraft parked. If you look at where we are today, there is about 1,800 wide-body aircraft parked, all passenger aircraft. And on the freighter side, everything is flying. And it's flying at a very high utilization as well. And so what you see depicted here in blue are the airline freighters, so where all of our capacity is located, for example. And it's all deployed and it's all flying at a very high utilization. The express freighters, same thing. Everything that can be operated is operated at the moment. And then you see, of course, the steep decline in passenger belly capacity across the world. The increase that you have seen throughout the months here from a passenger belly perspective has predominantly been airlines reactivating some passenger aircraft and operating them as passenger freighters. And listening just into Turhan, that was something that he alluded to as well. And I'm sure that some of my fellow panelists will talk about that also. That is something out of necessity to ensure that the airline keeps flying, keep pilots current, and obviously capitalizing on some of that demand that's out there at higher yields. Now, if we look at where we are today and trying to look into what will 2021 look like and what needs to happen in order to see a reactivation. Well, we try to look at the market indicators here and also anticipate the introduction of a vaccine happening here in the first quarter, which you can see depicted in the center of the slide. And what was expected last year is, of course, that the rollout of several vaccines with high efficacy rate and distributed very widely would happen sometime in the first quarter. Well, if we look at where we are today, we can conclude that it hasn't necessarily been rolled out at the amounts that we had anticipated or would like to see. There's a slight delay in that. It's also unevenly distributed around the world. And this, excuse me, will have an impact on the recovery of the global passenger fleet. And if you look down on the right-hand side here, what are the key drivers that will drive this outlook, and how much more capacity will we see re-enter into the market? Well, it's going to depend on the distribution of the vaccine and the amount of vaccines coming out, and the pace that it will be distributed and obviously administered as well. It's also going to have an impact, of course, on regulations as far as how quickly can nations open borders. And at the moment, we are seeing the opposite. We're not seeing borders reopen. We're seeing more borders close. And that has, of course, a significant impact on the plans for recovery going forward as well. But let's assume that that happens. What then? Well, first of all, we need to make sure that people get healthy. We all stay healthy, and that we get our confidence back in starting to travel. And I know a lot of people would like to do that, myself included, but we need to get there. And then, of course, the borders have to open across the world, and it needs to be harmonized. In addition to that, we need to make sure as an airline industry that we have the finances that we can reactivate all the aircraft. And as you have seen, there's been a tremendous amount of distress around our industry, and continues to be, because obviously these assets, very valuable assets that are currently parked, they need to be paid as well, and they need to be paid for the long-term future in order to reactivate them. We need to maintain all the aircraft that are currently on the ground, and you need to obviously make sure that you keep your crews current and get the aircraft back flying again. So it's the whole apparatus that needs to happen here in order to really get all the capacity back is likely going to push further to the right as far as time is concerned than what we had hoped as an industry and anticipated as well. And that will, of course, put a tremendous amount of pressure on the existing capacity that we have in the markets and that we have to play with. Now, if we then think about the demand side, and what we saw in 2020 was, of course, an immediate decline in production and air freight demand as factories closed and borders closed, and there were a lot of challenges, of course, throughout the global supply chain. But we saw a really quick recovery of demand as well, because inventories were depleted and demand continued. And there was new demand. Initially, it was, of course, all the PPE. Well, that's now gone. But overall demand has certainly picked up very, very quickly. And if you look at the expectations then on the short term and the longer term, is that, first of all, PMI index at the moment is well above 50, and it's even up to 60 in certain markets. And as you all know, anything above an indicator 50 here shows basically a strong confidence in future orders. And PMI for air freight, of course, looking 3 to 6 months out. So that kind of anticipates that if we see strong demand today, we're going to see even stronger demand here in the next 6 to 12 months. And that's, of course, very reassuring for the air freight industry as such. Depleted inventories. Even though we're not shopping in brick and mortar stores at the moment, the online sales have exploded. So as an example, here in the United States, we had a penetration rate as far as sales on the internet at about 16% at the end of 2019. By September, October 2020, that penetration rate was around 30%. It took us about 15 years to get to the 16%. It took us less than 9 months to get to doubling that amount. And that is here to stay. So it won't necessarily go away as far as when stores open up and we can be outside again. And that demand will continue, and that is predominantly shipped by air as well. And we also need to remember that there is very limited ocean capacity available, and quite some infrastructure challenges with container shortages, challenges at ports, both in regard to infrastructure and manpower. So that is something that we obviously need to watch out for going forward. And the inflow of new capacity is also very, very limited. And if you look at them beyond 2024, you look into 2030, the outlook there is fairly positive as well. Of course, there are going to be cycles that we go through, driven by various events around the world. But overall, the expectation is that there's going to be a stable general growth, somewhere between 1 to 3, maybe higher as well in certain years percent. From an air freight point of view. Now, if you talk about express and e-commerce, that's growing more than double that pace. And we have seen that developing here over the past several years, and we will see that develop over the next coming years as well. And of course, with that is the shift from B2B, which is the traditional way that air freight moved, to a much larger amount of B2C. And Sebastian, you alluded to that in your opening as well, with an entrance such as Amazon, Alibaba, and Mercado Libre, and Lazada, and Rakuten, and others, of course, are participating in this space. And that is something that we already have seen. And we should remember there that a lot of the lower end e-commerce moved on passenger bellies before the pandemic, and all of that has now shifted into very dedicated freighter networks, which of course are there to stay as the pandemic ends as well. Now, in summary, what we are looking at here is, first of all, the belly capacity is unfortunately not going to come back anytime soon by the looks of it, unless, of course, we get a very rapid rollout of the vaccine and the other drivers are resolved, as I talked about earlier. And the expectations from the industry in general is that when they come back in full capacity, that's going to be around 2024. But that capacity is going to be generally reduced by up to 20% more for others compared to in 2019. And that is, of course, driven by the current demand and the viability to keep networks and fleet operating. And the intercontinental networks, and particularly the business destinations, they are going to be likely the ones slowest to recover. Leisure traffic is likely going to pick up first. And that is an indicator, of course, that the amount of belly capacity coming back into the freight side of the industry is going to be fairly limited, and it's going to be drawn out and likely the last to recover. If you're thinking about new freighter production capacity, well, the current order book is relatively small and is predominantly dominated by the integrators. And that means that the wide body capacity that's ordered will mainly go to the likes of FedEx, UPS, and DHL. There are some sprinkle aircraft in there that will go to others as well. And we also need to remember that the 747-8s, for example, that I referred to earlier, we are going to take the last deliveries as Atlas here, and that's going to be in the first and early second half of 2022. And after that, there won't be any more 747-8s produced ever. So that is, of course, a challenge, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. And also thinking about open production slots, if you are interested in entering, there are no open production slots for wide-body freighters until the latter part in 2023. So even there, the production line is kind of filled. When it comes to conversions, we need, of course, more capacity in the space. And the very promising 777-300 production project here, that is not going to enter into the market until late 2023, likely 2024. So that's still quite some ways away before we can see that come into the market. And besides that, there is no other wide body conversion platform in the market at the moment. And it takes time to develop an STC. It takes time, of course, to go through the engineering and get such an asset into the market. So we are really constrained there when it comes to wide bodies. And now I'm talking the 777 and 747 equivalents. Of course, you have the 330 platform, you have the 767s, but they are more designated for regional networks and not necessarily for large intercontinental. And there you will see more, of course, more introduction of converted aircraft over the next several years, for which there is a high demand as well. So in conclusion here, I think the overall capacity will remain very constrained here for the next few years, and demand will continue to grow faster than supply. And as we said earlier, especially driven and fueled by express and e-commerce, as we as consumers, of course, and the growing consumer class is expanding rapidly, currently as we see it, and certainly over the next several years as well. And with that, everybody, I just would like to wish you all a great continued conference, and I'm happy to engage with you here in your Q&As later on, and of course also in the panel discussion. So Sebastian, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Very insightful, and I agree with most of the conclusions that you just stated. So basically, you know, it's the outlook for cargo in yields should be good if you looked at the capacity development and the demand forecast. I would like to have a panel discussion after the other two presentations. So I would like to now give the floor to Mike Duggan. Can you please put your presentation up, Mike?
Sure, Sebastian. I will do my best. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So thanks very much, Michael. Good to see you. And It feels a little bit intimidating, as much as I've known you for a long time, to sit here. Eastern Airlines is a very small and modest operation compared to what we all know as the great mighty Atlas. Nevertheless, hopefully I've got some alternative insights or additional comments to add to what you had to say. Indeed, I too agree with everything you had to say. So, you know, moving forwards, looking beyond into 21 and beyond, you know, what is that freighter capacity gap going to be? You know, how long for the conversions you mentioned? You know, why are freighters so dominant today? And of course, the big question, when is passenger capacity going to return to the market? But first of all, just let me talk a little bit about Eastern Airlines. You have to have that little plug, of course. We're a very new airline, although a very famous name, but we haven't been around for something like 30 years. Eastern Airlines was one of the big three back in the day when I was a youngster. So it's actually I'm quite proud to be representing that name again now. We've got a threefold strategy in our business. We've started with scheduled passenger services, offering what we consider to be value for money, low cost, but using wide body aircraft, mainly in Central and South America, and trying to find underserved routes, especially during 2020 when a lot of capacity was removed from the market, yet we still did see some demand. Our business as well is concentrated a lot on contract flying. We've done a lot of repatriation and charter flights during 2020, and some of that has helped us to build our passenger networks on the back of that. We're also a specialist in terms of flying aircraft for other people that don't necessarily have the operation capability. So we've started just recently operating 2 767s on behalf of New England Patriots football team. And we're in discussions with the usual suspects of the world, express and e-commerce carriers, to hopefully operate aircraft on their behalf too. Finally, as you'd expect from my background, interested in scheduled freighter operations as we move forwards later this year or perhaps into 2022. Our fleet currently, as I said, is quite modest. It's 10 767 passenger aircraft and very shortly to join 2 777s. So not necessarily the most modern, but these are good workhorses still with a lot of life in them. And for the kind of markets that we're looking at, really work well for us with the low-cost passenger segment that we're looking at. This route map on the right is a little bit out of date. As you can expect, there's been a lot of chopping and changing. The market fluctuates, but generally most of those points have been operated in the last 6 months, or we're about to be. So moving forwards, why I was invited here wasn't necessarily to talk about Eastern. You can all look us up and find out who we are. What's my views on the outlook for freighter networks and freighter capacity? I'm pretty sure I'm talking in much along the same lines as everybody else has. So I don't have resources that Michael does to access Seabury forecasts, but you know, looking at the market, you know, we've all seen it. This year last year has been extraordinary. COVID-19, none of us could have seen it coming along and the way it's impacted. Air cargo volumes actually down overall about 15% as a result, but with passenger capacity being so significantly reduced, we've all seen the impacts that's happened on, especially on freighters. Interesting to note as a basic comment that air freight demand is concentrated in about 50 airports. About 85% of all air cargo goes to just 50 airports. Freighters generate 90% of the world's air cargo volumes, yet we're only carrying about 50% of those volumes. So it's key to note that some of the key underlying factors that drive this demand and how sensitive the market is when the passenger bellies go away. Another factor to consider is, why are freighters so much more important to the market? We can control the schedules and timing, which impacts our express markets. Direct routings leads to more reliability and less cargo being mishandled in hub airports. Capacity is generally better matched to demand. You only have to look at Asia, across the Pacific, or into Europe, and to see that there's not that much passenger capacity. So freighters make up the bulk of that, meeting that demand. Freighters can utilize bigger ULDs, which makes it easier for freight forwarders to build their large volume traffic flows and consignments. And of course, the basic issue is that we can carry all sorts of dangerous goods, hazardous materials, live animals that you can't on passenger aircraft. Another comment that I've noticed recently, which came out in a small article, was that freighter retirements have slowed rapidly in the last 3 years, even before the pandemic came along. Only 17 aircraft were retired in 2019. If you look at the previous 15 years, it averaged somewhere about 80 freighters a year retiring. Those aircraft are going to come up against inevitable pressures, to put them to bed and become Coke cans. Maybe some of them with nose doors, and others will be able to sustain some long-term pressure, a long-term lifetime. But really, as we look forwards, that's going to have an impact on the overall demand for freighters. Looking forwards, what's going to happen into the next 12 months? Well, ultimately, pressure is going to remain on freighters. Passenger conversion market is solidly booked through the next 18 to 24 months. Eastern, as a carrier that's looking to convert some of our 767s, finding slots to change them is very difficult. And as Michael mentioned, the 777 conversion isn't due for, I think I've put 18 plus. I think I probably should add 12 months to that. It's another couple of years away. That's going to only put further demand for freighters, the likes that we've seen of various passenger aircraft being operated cargo only. And of course, the obvious statements are ultimately, factors are going to be driven by what happens with COVID-19. When will we see return to the market of passenger aircraft is going to be based upon how long and how severe this pandemic is. What will be the change in travel restrictions? Will they ease with vaccines? And as we see the different speeds of vaccine rollouts in different countries, that's just in a Western environment. What happens when we go a bit further down the road and we've got vaccinated societies in Western environments, but the developing countries are all still spreading COVID around the world because they hadn't been vaccinated. So that could have all sorts of impacts. And what will be the behavioral factors in travel going forwards? And that'll all dictate how many passenger aircraft come back, where they fly to, what routes they're on, which ultimately leads to what the demand of freighters are going to be. I mentioned I don't have access to reports, etc., but ICAO just published a forecast the other day, came up with some similar responses that Seabury has. Their best case scenario is that passenger capacity would be approximately 30% what it was December 19, January 2020 in the next 6 months. And their worst case is about 50% below those levels, which really means nil growth. That's where we're at today. And that just has a continued impact on freighter demands. A couple of other factors to consider that we need to remember in all of this. I've mentioned already, air cargo growth is concentrated intra-Asia and from Asia to North America and Europe. That hasn't changed. And that will continue to be an impact upon where freighter demand is. We already see that at the moment where the passenger freighters are operating is out of Asia on long haul routes. Fuel prices still have a consideration. Will they impact older freighters if there is any change in supply and if oil prices go north again? And as we've also mentioned, the lack of immediate conversion aircraft just means that those demands are continued. In conclusion, Eastern Airlines is bullish about freighters. We are engaged with conversion houses and aircraft lessors to source freighters, to look at converting our aircraft. And as a small airline, we believe that there's a future in freighters and definitely one that we're looking at. We're discussing joint ventures with freight forwarders and agents that are coming to the market and looking at alliance opportunities with other carriers. If you consider all of the factors discussed, we see a positive future for freighters, which will support one of the key pillars of our strategy, which is to operate freighters alongside passenger aircraft. And with that, Sebastian, hopefully that gives you a reasonable insight, and I'm looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much. My contact details are there if anyone wants to find me. I'm sure they know other ways of doing that, but I'll hand back the floor now and stop sharing. Here you go.
Thanks, Mike. Very insightful as well. I think, there's a common thread, like Michael Steen was also saying, and I think we all agree that there's definitely a case for freighters and that there will be a shortage of capacity in the coming years. Interesting also that you say that, there's a case, the continuous case for freighters. And maybe later on in the panel discussion, we can see for how long, this could be economically viable, right? When is the threshold of what kind of demand, the return of demand, and what kind of capacity shortage that makes it still economically viable or not, right? So very interesting indeed. Thanks very much. I just found out that Fitsum is not able to join us, but he will be replaced by Solomon. Is Solomon, are you there?
Yes, Sebastian, and on the camera, I'm just having a little difficulties, but I'm on, Sebastian.
All right. Do you want me to share your presentation? I have your presentation. You want me to put it on screen, or you want to do it yourself?
Preferably if you could do it, because I'm still struggling to access some of the database from my side. I'm accessing from my iPad. So sorry if you can help me on this one. I sincerely appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll try to do so. Can you all see it?
Okay. Thank you very much, Sebastian. And I would like to apologize on behalf of Mr. Fitsum, who had some emergencies that he will not be able to join us on this Air Cargo Summit. So World Cargo Summit, correction, 2021. And I will be trying to highlight some of its progressive activities in terms of current stand of Ethiopian status, and maybe on the process of the Q&A or the discussion, we try to address the points that you would like us to be raised as a part of the discussion. So if it's okay like that, I'll continue, Sebastian. Thank you very much all. And just to give you a highlight, Ethiopian Airlines Group is established of 7 strategy business units, which one of them is the Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics Services, where we have the cargo business and the logistic business integrated all together as one. So as a highlight, Ethiopian has in general 7 business units: airports, Ethiopian Airports, Ethiopian Travel and Tourism, Ethiopian Aviation Academy, International Passenger Services, Express Service, and the Ethiopian MRO Maintenance and Engineering Services, making the Ethiopian Airlines Group. So this is as Ethiopian Airlines as a group, as it looks like. So coming to cargo in particular, you can scroll down the slides, Sebastian. cargo as part of the Ethiopian Airlines 4 pillars of fleet, HR, infrastructure, and IT services. As part of the infrastructure, Ethiopian Cargo and Logistics has the largest cargo terminals with all modes of cargo facilities, which will be used as for the servicing of, in terms of cold chain value products and any form of cargoes that are be transported on air service business. So for this, we have a dedicated more than 34,000 square meters of perishable cargo capacity with an annual capacity of the total warehouse of 1,000 plus tons per annum to help us work on this cargo business development through our hub Ethiopia in Addis Ababa. You may continue on that one, Sebastian. In terms of fleet size, as a dedicated cargo, we have fleet destinations. We have dedicated 66 international cargo destinations and 125 passenger daily destinations that will be complementing into 5 continents, serving all into the 5 continents with possible multiple hubs inside Africa, integrated in Togolome, Askai, as part of our partners in Lilongwe, in Maputo, and in Chadian, to ensure that all the markets are addressed in Africa and reachable to Ethiopian Airlines networks, reachable to all in the world, especially to the Africa. And also worldwide, we have, as I mentioned, a total of 66 dedicated freighter destinations that are comprised of the 5 continents, excluding Australia for now, and also Antarctica, which is yet to be there manned. I'm sure it will be also one of these years will be part of that. One of the coming years also is part of our program plans. If I just want to just simply highlight on these ones, and also going forward in terms of fleet capacity, and the next okay, you can skip this one. It's just analog of what I'm going to speak in downwards. Yes. In terms of fleet capacity, as a dedicated freighter, currently we're running 2 737-800 freighters and 10 fully dedicated 777 freighters, though one is still under mechanical for the incident happened a little earlier in July. But as a full cargo operator, we have 3 737 freighters and 9 777 serving as a full dedicated freighters. And also based on the new norm, which is COVID issues, we have made some extra capacity available by converting some of our passenger aircraft capacities into dedicated freighter aircrafts, which you can see on the next slide. We have included around 16 more passenger aircraft reconfigured to be freighter aircraft. That's made of a total of 777-300, 789, 777-200, A350, and also including Q400s, which also will support in increasing the cargo capacity to a total of 758 tons additional capacity compared to what we have already as a dedicated freighter. So this will be served as in total, it will be around 28 full freighter and converted freighter dedicated capacity now currently serving our networks. Of course, this is also complemented by the aircraft, the belly capacity of the passenger aircraft, which comprise of, if you scroll it up, Sebastian, which comprise of around 69 passenger wide body belly capacities, including the narrow body 737 aircraft capacity. That also will give us a total capacity of 416 tons of capacity more into the fleet services. So this in general is all about the network of, and also the capacity of we deployed in terms of Ethiopian Airlines cargo in making sure to address, of course, the current new norm, which has become as cargo to be a private business. As just an information of an update on Ethiopian Airlines' current market situations, we have new developments of e-commerce business. We have linked and established in terms of providing e-commerce services with one of the continent's logistical e-commerce prepared company, African Electronic Trade Group. It's a company that's constituted by all African nations as a way of trying to complement the e-commerce business into Africa and within integration into Africa and within Africa also. So another mode of development is the sea-air mode transportation realization, which is a combination of the sea and the air services to provide a much cheaper and a faster service to our customers, which we will be using one of the free trade port of trade zone port of Djibouti and also our hub in Addis Ababa for the air services, to make sure that the integration is done for all African nations to help them have a more cost-effective and cheaper and reliable and faster services compared to the total sea freight service. So these are the new developments when it comes to Ethiopian Airlines. And of course, as a preparation of the COVID-19, the pandemic, and also for the vaccine distribution program, we have made some kind of adjustments in terms of infrastructure. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, is a warehouse with an annum capacity of 1 million tons. And in that, we have also put additional 230 square meters deep freezer facility peculiar for this vaccine purpose. And also our aircraft, the configured aircrafts are for all aircraft that we have moved from the passenger into the cargo. All are temperature controlled aircrafts maintained to be maintained and ready to serve on the demands of this the COVID vaccines transportation. In terms of human resource, of course, we have a dedicated team and specialized task force in ensuring that the COVID vaccine transportation is to the expected and the requirement of the international standards. By the same token, we have also availed the required equipments like cool dollies, envirotenners, real-time temperature monitors that are to be posted and situated inside shipments, and also a dry ice processing plant, which we have on the verge of completion, the in-house capability of producing the dry ice requirements according to what has been reported as a requirement for the current COVID transportations, vaccine transportations. So these are the new developments in Ethiopian Airlines as an highlight. But Sebastian, maybe I think this much enough about our presentation, and I would like to take on the Q&A on those points that has been raised as a point of discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Solomon, for that presentation, and to show us a little bit about your network and your fleet. Maybe a question to you, Solomon, and since you just finished your presentation, do you have any expansion plans in the next 5 years? I mean, do you have any freighters on orders?
Yes, Sebastian, yes, we still have orders that we'll be expecting by next year, for some of them for the delivery. We will have additional 777s that we expect, and also some additional 737s, 800s for the regional operations. As it stands now, this is what we have so far.
Okay, good. Yeah, so maybe again summarizing what I've heard in the different presentations again, and also taking a little bit the actual news that we're seeing now with the row between AstraZeneca and the European Union. I think the vaccination is going a little bit slower, at least in Europe. I mean, Israel is leading the world by vaccinating most of the people, but here they're really lagging behind in Europe. That will result in, of course, that we will be able to fly much later, I think. And there's a lot of lockdowns of airspace here in the Netherlands. Just happened a week ago. I think Germany is now evaluating it as well. Israel just closed their international airspace. So I think for the foreseeable short term, there will be a shortage of capacity, especially in belly capacity. So that will continue to put pressure on yields. And I heard, especially from Mike and Michael's presentation, that there will be no slots available for freighters, and also very difficult to get conversions. And two things I would like to maybe comment and ask as well on this. First of all, you would maybe as somebody from outside of the industry would say, well, Boeing will have a lot less, and Airbus have a lot less passenger aircraft to produce in the coming years. Why don't they ramp up the freighter production? But of course, they're limited by other constraints like the platforms, etc. So that's a pity. On the other hand, do you think, and that's a question to the three of you, do you think that we'll get maybe to the famous the pick cycle, that when there's a high demand for a certain product, like in our commoditized industry, that everybody goes into it? And then, for example, right now with the freighters, everybody wants to go into freighters, is ordering freighters, and obviously they will be delivered only years later, and sometimes they will be delivered maybe in a downturn again. So do you think that we will have, now a lot of, demand and little capacity, and we maybe in 5-6 years, it will be a reverse because people will jump into investing in freighters? So I don't know, Michael, maybe any thoughts on that, Michael Steen?
Sure. No, I think those are all great questions, Sebastian. And first of all, we need to recognize that the pandemic that we're currently enduring here, we have nothing to compare it with. You cannot compare it to 9/11. You cannot compare it to the global financial crisis. You have to look at larger events because this is really a widespread globally. And that has, of course, a fundamental impact that we haven't seen the likes of either, right? So you mentioned the OEMs, Boeing and Airbus. If you look at the amount of sheer cancellations that they have had in passenger aircraft orders and also delays of orders of passenger aircraft, which is logical, right? Because the demand has just fallen off a cliff. That has an impact not only on them, but also on their suppliers, so the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, that in many cases are totally dependent on the collaboration that they have with Boeing or Airbus. So you have disruption there, which means, of course, that raw material is not going to be put into the supply chain. You're going to see some of them, unfortunately, getting into distress and disappearing. And when you have to ramp up that, it doesn't matter how much infrastructure you have, because you're not going to have the ability to produce the aircraft. The second thing is financing. If you look at the distress that we're seeing now on the passenger side of the market with the amount of parked aircraft, a lot of the lenders have, of course, pulled back the financing capabilities and also increased rates. And that means that it makes it difficult for existing operators to come up with plans for how you're going to, let's say, expand in the future, or at least even keep your airline afloat. So that has an impact. And it's going to take a while before that cycle kind of corrects itself. Now, on the flip side of that is, of course, the cargo industry. And the cargo industry is doing very well at the moment, as we talked about earlier. So we need that extra capacity. So the cycle that we're in is really unhealthy, and it will stay like that for a few years before you're seeing new capacity come into the market. But I would like to stress another thing here, and that is the existing capacity and that's how quickly the passenger fleet can return. And you talked about the rolling out of the let's say the vaccinations that we're getting and getting some cures in place as well. The WHO, they're responsible for about 4.2 billion people and the distribution of vaccines to them around the world. And you're talking about major continents, you're talking about large nations with large populations as well. And when we think about that in aviation terms, and the WHO, they're predicting that's going to take a few years to get to a large amount of vaccinations there, or inoculations. The global passenger travel industry is completely integrated. So unless we get a harmonized and aligned rollout of the vaccinations as well, it's going to be really, really hard to see how you open up these globalized integrated hub and spokes networks and get, let's say, the majority of the capacity intercontinentally back that we're looking for. So I think we see challenges on the production side. We see challenges in the existing supply chain and pipeline, and obviously operationally there are some challenges as well, and that will certainly create some difficulties for us to get back to a more normalized environment.
Okay, and maybe back to the other question I had, Mike, is on the, that people will maybe invest too much in freighters right now, and you think there will be maybe an oversupply?
Is that for me or Michael?
Yeah, no, Mike. Sorry, Mike. Yeah.
I think potentially going back a few years that would have been the case, and we saw a huge rush into converting 747s and 767s and A300s, etc. But I think that playing field has changed now. As I mentioned, the number of freighters that have been retired in the last 3 years has come right down. And aircraft are continuing to operate for longer, and the fundamentals of the market, as Michael just talked about, are not changing or likely to go away. This pandemic, and I hate to say it because I need to travel personally, let alone for business reasons. I just don't see it changing much very quickly, and if it does, it'll be on only very specific trade lanes between the travel hubs that have the corridors that they've talked about, and therefore the demand is going to be there for freighters and even passenger freighters going forwards. I look at some of the carriers, Turkish Airlines mentioned earlier. My friends at Emirates here in Dubai are telling me I was speaking to an engineer, they're converting more, they're taking more seats out of more aircraft to create more passenger freighters at Emirates at the moment. So I see the demand continuing for a good period of time yet, unfortunately. And I can't see that pig cycle that you're referencing happening. There just aren't the aircraft being converted anymore. I'd love to. As Eastern Airlines, that's my job and goal is to have Eastern operating freighters, and I would have had them in weeks ago if I could, but unfortunately they're just not around.
So what do you see for the passenger freighters? For how long do you foresee that they will still continue to be flying?
It's a good question because there is a significant investment in removing the seats out of the aircraft, especially modern 777-300 ERs. They've got IFE equipment in them. It's not just taking some seats out. There's all the cabling that goes with that. And it's quite a significant exercise. And then they have to store these seats and equipment. And electronic equipment hates being fiddled with. When they go and put it back into the aircraft, they have to make sure it's come from. It's a logistics nightmare for the engineers. So the airlines wouldn't be doing it if they didn't see this as having some level of sustained 6 to 12 months level of utilization of these aircraft. That's my opinion.
Good.
Just to add to that, Sebastian, if I can as well, it's also not necessarily optimal for the supply chain industry. If you look at freight forwarders, they of course build their business model in optimizing the pallets that they're building. And for that, of course, freighters are much superior than the passenger aircraft. So you will see them continue to fly on certain trade lanes where yields are sustainable, where you can use the larger bellies of the 777s and 350s and alike. And so that will remain for some time. But we also need to recognize that it's not really moving the needle when it comes to the growing demand that we see at the moment compared to the available supply.
No, I agree, and not suitable for all products either. So Solomon, you have anything to add to that? Because Ethiopian obviously operates a lot of passenger freighters. So how do you see the future of that? You think you will continue, like Mike says, for the next 6 months to a year with these flights?
Yes, Sebastian. With what we have seen so far, and of course what's coming even now around, and also looking into the fact that how far the vaccine will first be reaching, and also making I think for the next 6 months to 1 year time, we will definitely be shouldering using these freighter aircrafts because, of course, as you have said, it will not be easy to get a full freighter aircraft as of at this moment because, of course, everybody has a demand. So I mean, the orders which are already there, even if they are tripled, of course, the delivery, like you mentioned, Sebastian, is going to be after a year or two, probably. So definitely, we will be using the freighter. We call them freighter actually, or passenger freighters, to mean that the seat removed passenger aircraft serving as a cargo. So that will be for the next 1 year. Definitely, it's going to be part. They are going to be part of us to complement the gap between the capacity demand and the available capacity in terms of freighter aircraft.
Okay, thanks, Solomon. Maybe another question that we asked that we touched on in the beginning. So there's very little slots available for freighters, but if you look at the future, the 747, the Dash 8 will. I think Michael, you will get the last of them, right? The last production freighters. But then now I'm really looking far ahead, right? I'm looking 20, 30 years from now. I mean. What is the use? What is the economic use of a 747? About 20 years, 15 to 20 years or something. The technical use maybe 30 years.
Oh, you're looking longer than 30 years for most aircraft actually.
Yeah.
Especially for freighters, you will keep them much longer. So between 30 to 35 years, right? Definitely. So look, if we look at what's available for freighters now, starting with the wide bodies. So you have, of course, the most economic freighter now is the 747-8 on the long haul trade lanes, right? That gives you the lowest unit cost, and followed by the 747-400 because you have lower ownership cost, and then you have the 777, which is a very capable freighter, but also an expensive investment. So if you think about what's ahead of us now, so the Dash 8 is unfortunately sunsetting, and it's a pity. It's an aircraft that the industry absolutely needs, but it's also understandable in the current environment. And as I talked about earlier, by the lack of passenger orders, right, it's going to be difficult for any OEM to invest over the long time, right, in an uncertain market. So there is no replacement for the Dash 8. The good news is that these aircraft that we are now taking delivery of next year and the new 777s that are coming into the market, they will be around for the next 30 plus years, right? And the 747-400s that we have, they have another 15 years or so, some even more than that life in them. So the fleet is going to be there to a large degree. But there's nothing coming behind it. There's nothing new. There's nothing larger. The 777X freighter project that is being worked on that program here is dependent on how successful it's going to be on the passenger side. It's a smaller aircraft, both from a queue perspective as well as a weight perspective. And having the extra distance capabilities is good for passengers, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference for freight. Because we can make a tech stop, for example, to optimize the capacity of the aircraft. So that is a concern. On the Airbus side, you have the 350, and there are discussions about introducing that as a freighter as well. But it's going to be a 777-like aircraft. So if you think about the largest types of aircraft, there is nothing coming behind this. And then, of course, as we talked about earlier, you have the promising program regarding the 777-300 production concept that's out there, and that definitely will get some great life, and there is good feedstock for it as well. But again, it's some time ahead of us. So unfortunately, there is good dialogue, but we are not necessarily seeing any new good ideas as far as what is going to take over that large wide body capacity. Now in the mid-size space, it's different because there you have the A330-300, which is really promising. The 767, you don't have that many left. You have about call it 120 aircraft left that could be converted, but with different engine platforms as well. So some are attractive, some are not. Right. So, and then when you go into the narrow body space, which is important for let's say short range e-commerce, express distribution, etc., you have the 737-800s, so the NGs that definitely are going to be attractive, and also the A321s, which could be a great 757 replacement. So there's more light in the tunnel in the mid-size and the smaller, the narrow body sector, but certainly nothing in the wide bodies.
No, I agree. Mike. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the key concern is the lack of a nose door aircraft. I think there'll be plenty of other aircraft that will come in. The 777-300 conversions will do a good job. The 350, etc. Maybe a 777X factory freighter, or the continued production of the 777 freighter. But at some stage, the lack of nose doors is going to impact the outsized market for long pieces and the stuff that Atlas and the like do so well.
Yep.
The Russian Antonov aircraft has had its issues recently, but I've heard some stories about them talking about re-engineering or giving new avionics. Perhaps there's some life to that, but whether that will fulfill enough demand is another question. So yeah, I think there's a big concern for the outsized specialist market going forwards as we reach into the time frame that you're referencing. But otherwise, the general cargo market, I think, will be well served, even if not necessarily by the best aircraft.
No, I agree. So, but basically, so it's a call to Boeing and Airbus, but probably more Boeing, to come up with an alternative, right? Not immediately, because we still have time, but in the long future, I think they definitely should come up with a solution to this.
We should actually call out to both, I think, and especially to Airbus, because we, as any other industry, we need competition. We need
that's also true.
Competition as well, and I think it's a dialogue that we as an industry have. Both Boeing and Airbus are formidable producers of aircraft, right? But we as an industry, we need the larger wide body freighter like aircraft, and as Mike said, particularly the ones with a nose loader, because that's important for efficiency and also for, of course, outside pieces.
Yeah, you're right. It's dominated by Boeing, right? The freighter market, more or less. So it would be welcome to have more competition. Sorry, Mike.
I was going to say, you should remember the reason the 747 was designed in the first place. It was in competition with Lockheed for the Galaxy program that the US military had in place. It required a nose loader. So I think the design requirements back then were different than today's market. So the question is there a real demand for a nose loading aircraft in the long term to carry these outsized pieces? And what is that demand? Is it sufficient for someone like Boeing or somebody to design a new aircraft, or just say, oh, we'll just, maybe we can just hope that Atlas can keep the 747s running, in perpetuity. So,
yeah. So, Solomon, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Well, I think what's been said by Michael and is or remains to be the same, but still going forward, I think, of course, the big boy aircraft might be needed in the market for some peculiar transaction, but going forward, many of the transactions are going to another form of business, which is the e-commerce, which might not require of a nose loading type of aircraft, and or also such nature of kind of business as might be. But from operational perspective, and of course from the better of the market, and also in terms of cost and reliability, I think what's already running now as a fleet available by Boeing as a 777 is still going to be a dominant aircraft from our perspectives in terms of fulfilling the future demand, which we're seeing that it might not require a big size. Of course, the 777X might not fulfill what's been missed on having of the 747's nose loaders or so, but in terms of having more capacities, according to the briefing we have from Boeing, it might complement more to capacity, but still, I think some of the facts also mentioned by Michael, if Airbus can come up with a better idea of any other form in terms of to mix up the competition, is also a point that we need to see also in this regards.
Good. Thanks, Solomon. If you talk about freighters and airports and handling facilities and infrastructure, you operate, especially Ethiopian Atlas, you operate across the world. How do you see that? What would be your wish list? How would you see things improve? Is it working very fine right now, or is there improvements to be made in the infrastructure? And
well, I think there are, Sebastian, as we have talked about for many years on various industry platforms, right? First of all, we need much broader collaboration across our industry, right? That is something that need to be sped up here quite rapidly. As we see, of course, the global supply chain changing as well. That means that various stakeholders, they need to raise their game and come up with efficiencies in order to make sure that we can turn around these very expensive assets quickly, right? So we can get the return on investment that our shareholders are wishing for. So from an airport perspective, certainly when it comes to digitization and also infrastructure and the way that cargo is being processed through these airports, because there is very limited added value in handling at an airport, because we need the cargo to get in and out as quickly as possible. And I think that there are a lot of improvements that can be made there. There are a lot of good initiatives going on and a lot of good dialogue as well. But the whole integrated dialogue between airlines, intermediaries, the handlers, of course, other service providers, digital service providers, etc., that needs to really raise its game and gain some speed as well. So without pointing at any specific areas or locations, I think in general, the industry needs to raise their game now.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think?
Total agreement with Michael. We've been talking about this for many, many years now. And it's not just a freighter problem, it's a general air cargo problem. Some airports and some authorities are better than others. But overall, generally, we know the requirement to improve things, digitize e-freight, that magic expression that's been bandied around for years. It needs to happen, and it's long overdue. So much discussion has been had on it, and it just needs to happen.
We talk about it for I think already 20 years in every conference, right? But unfortunately, very very little happens in this field. And the technology is there, but maybe the willingness to change is not always there. I don't know. What do you think, Solomon?
Yes, I can't agree more. It's obvious. Yes. With the current growth of fleets and of course freighters capacity, really capacity is also a concern, or in terms of capabilities also a concern from countries to countries, point to points. It's like Mike said, in general, most of the places we have a lot of issues we need to clear. Of course, technology, as you've been saying, e-freight has been the point of discussion for the last 20 years, but we are yet to be there, which is also impacting on all the infrastructure requirements of also a destination or a point of freight contact for such kind of transaction. So I can't agree anymore on this one, Sebastian.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Solomon. Maybe we're running towards the end of our session. Maybe a last question, a little bit political and economical. We all know that air cargo is driven by global trade. We have now a different president in the US. I mean, Biden with Trump. He was very protectionistic and especially against China. Will there be a different? Will there be a different strategy with Biden? Do you think, and will that result in more trade? For as far as it looks right now, is that he's also going to be tough in China, and some of the deals that were made or not made will be very difficult to unwindle, I think. But so I personally think it's not going to have a big impact. But I don't know what your opinion is on this, because it's of course a big driver of our air cargo volumes.
Absolutely, Sebastian. I think first of all, trade is global, right? And trade is integrated, and it's important that we have very good bilateral trade agreements around the world. And it's not only the US that drives that. It obviously has a big impact on the kind of policies that the administration will have here going forward. And I think it's early days still, and we'll see how that develops. But as of course, the more the interaction and interplay with the other nations around the world, what's happening in China, what's happening in the EU, what's happening in other major manufacturing and consuming countries, We have seen, of course, coming out of 2019 when was sort of the height of the trade war and the impact that had, and then of course the demand now to really collaborate together. I think the world is recognizing now that we need to have very harmonized trade agreements, and if we get there, I think it's something that will have a positive impact, of course, on air freight demand for sure. So I think that there are some good indicators here that the dialogue is now settling down a bit, probably less rhetoric and more open and an organized discussion. And I think that's something that the world is going to benefit from, and certainly for the United States as well.
Mike, how do you see it? And how do you see it for your business in particular?
I'd like to say I don't particularly see any major significant change from Joe Biden as opposed to Donald Trump. Yes, there'll be some political noise that goes around it. What we've seen more impact has been the supply chains readjusting their focus from having so much concentration of supply from one supplier, where they've then run short of various components of their supply chain. And now we're seeing there's much less concentration, that they're moving the different hubs strategies, different stock strategies, nearshoring, so that they're not dependent upon one area where they then run into severe troubles when there is a blip or a political issue or a weather issue or whatever it is. I think that's the bigger factor that may change some of the supply chain lanes. Vietnam has grown a lot in the last 24 months, and that's been part of it. Moving some of the manufacturing out of China. I think not just because of political reasons, but to have multiple supply chain structures to the way that the companies are sourcing their goods.
I think it's a very, very valid point that you raised there, because this crisis has learned us that we should not be dependent too much, right? I mean, we have seen it also with the pharmaceuticals, especially, right? I mean, I think of the generic drugs, maybe 70-80% come out of China and India, so there's a huge dependency there. And I agree with you completely that will be more near sourcing and multiple sourcing. Maybe some of the outsourcing also, or outsourcing to other countries also, were driven by lower labor costs, but with the increased technology improvements and automation and digitization, do you think that maybe that also comes a little bit to more nearshoring, because basically we can automate things that are manually done right now?
Possibly. I think consumers are quite more demanding. Every day goes by now. I think probably a more political question that you might want to have asked is the impacts of the recent European vaccination producers and Brexit and UK, and the jealousy of the Europeans of how well the Brits have done so far with their vaccination programs. So maybe that would have been more important than impact on air cargo.
Yeah.
Sebastian, if I can go back to your question as well, because I see it slightly differently. I don't think that there's going to be a massive move towards nearshoring. For certain products, yes, right? And we saw it with the pandemic here, that nations need to be self-supplied when it comes to protective equipment, for example. That is one thing. But if you look at how integrated the global supply chain is and where manufacturing is happening, where raw material are coming from, who the intermediary producers and manufacturers are, you're going to see more shifting in and let's say multi-locations, as we said before. So you go to places like Vietnam and Bangladesh and Pakistan and India and other places outside of China, right? That will happen for sure. But we also need to remember where the consumer base is, right? So if you look at the production in Asia, is predominantly there, not for exports, but for exports within the region, not necessarily intercontinental exports. So that in itself will obviously not make it economically viable to move larger parts of manufacturing to high costs for the production locations. I just don't see that happening.
No, I agree to a certain point with you, and I think also it's not that you change your factory from one country to the other country in one day, right? I mean, this is a huge decision. It will take years, and and it will also be affecting for the next 5 to maybe, well, I don't know what the depreciation is on these factories, but these are multiple years. So I agree. Maybe Solomon, a last question also regarding to trade. We see that there's an increased influence of especially China and Africa. I mean, do you foresee that that trade lane will grow a lot between Asia and Africa in the foreseeable future?
Yes, I would say rightly yes, because China seems to be the African friend for the time being now, as what we have been seeing. So a lot of business and trade integrations and also developments in terms of infrastructures are also been seen in Africa by Chinese companies. So that means the African and China trade relation will be more strengthened. And in fact, we'll see more even growth, because the more the countries have become open and available, obviously the chances of being integrated with China, especially for the proximity and also for the for the readiness of products and availability of as you want it, will force that trade lane to be more even strengthened in the coming years to come.
Okay, very clear. Thanks, Solomon. Okay, we're approaching the end of our session. I want to thank you all, Mike, Michael, and Solomon, for your presentations and for your time and for your dedication and for your great contribution to this panel. A very warm digital applause to all of you, and I hope to see you soon when we have the old normal back and we can have a beer together.
Yeah, we'll hope to see.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Sebastian. Cheers, Michael. Bye, Solomon.
Okay. Bye.
James, Michael, take care.